Well, welcome everyone to the virtual world of the Eastside Freedom Library and this evening's program with Chris Stark and Mona Power and their new books, one of which is published, Chris's, and one of which is waiting to see the world, Mona's, and so we're getting a sneak preview. We're delighted to have you with us. We want to remember that even in this virtual world, that the Eastside Freedom Library sits on land that for centuries was Dakota land, and the Dakota people are an important part of the past, present, and future of the east side of St. Paul and more. I want to especially thank Lisa Albrecht and Sherry Lee Kwan for helping to bring this evening into existence. I want to use this as an example to say to all of you out there that if you have ideas for what you think would be good programs at the Eastside Freedom Library, let us know, make suggestions. We want input. We want to have a dynamic relationship with the communities with which we're working. So we've had a number of author events, and we're delighted to have this one. This is a very special one this evening. I'm going to introduce our authors. I also want to thank my colleague, Carla Reilly, who is our tech wizard for all of this, and will be hopefully controlling this. You are all, the rest of you, being rendered invisible and muted for the time being. You do have access to the chat in Zoom, and if you're out there in Facebook land, you also have access to the comment function on the Facebook page. Particularly when our authors are done and they're going to say a little bit and then read a bit. Then we'll have a wee bit of a conversation, and then we'll open up for your comments and questions. We hope this will be as much of an interaction as the world of Zoom and Facebook allow us to do. And then it's been our tradition that at the end of the formal part of the Q&A, we will encourage you all to reveal yourselves. And we can have a little bit of an informal kind of community building chat before we call it an evening. So that's our plan. So I'm going to introduce first Chris Stark, who is going to read first. Chris is an award-winning writer, organizer, and researcher with Ojibwe, Cherokee, and European ancestry. Her first novel, Nichols, A Tale of Dissociation, was a Lambda Literary Finalist. The book that she'll be reading from this evening, Carnival Lights, blends fiction and fact, ranges from reverie to nightmare and back again in a lyrical yet unflinching story of an Ojibwe family struggle to hold on to their land, their culture, and each other. It is certainly a timely book for a country and communities that are in need of deep healing. Mona Power is a Yanktonai Dakota author of 4 books of fiction. Her novel, The Grass Dancer, was awarded the Hemingway Prize. Other books, Sacred Wilderness, Roofwalker, and her recently completed but not yet published novel, A Council of Dolls, tells the story of 3 generations of Yanktonai Dakota women and their dolls, allies manifested during times of great challenge, highlighting how generational trauma develops and persists, especially as a result of the horrors of the Indian boarding school system, something that we've been hearing a lot about lately. But the ancestors somehow spoke to Mona before the story broke, and she was already deep at work in telling this story before the rest of us, or many of us, got a wake-up call about the boarding schools in both the US and Canada. So we're going to start with Chris. And if you want to say a little bit about your journey to the project, and then read whatever you would like to share with us. And I'm going to make myself invisible.
Yeah. Bonjour, everyone. My English name is Chris Stark, and my Anishinaabe name is Nagamo Zibi Unseekwe, which means singing little river woman. And I'm really happy to be here. And thank you for taking your time this evening to sit with us and to listen with us and participate in this with us. And I want to thank the ESFL and Peter and everyone else involved in bringing our reading about. And then also, of course, thanks to Mona Susan Power for participating in this with me. She's one of my favorite authors. So of course, it's very exciting to me to be reading with her. I actually started this book as a little writing exercise in a MFA program at the University of Central Florida 20 years ago. And I think it was like 7 to 10 pages, and it was supposed to be like a imitation of Cormac McCarthy's All the Pretty Horses, right? Yeah. The two main characters are Cher and Chris, and their Ojibwe teenage cousins. And the professor said, you owe it to these two girls to finish this book. And unlike Mona, it has been a very, very long journey with this book. And I found myself the past probably 7 or 8 years thinking I was done with it. And then a whole other character, the whole story would just like download into my head in like, 30 seconds. And it just kept coming and kept coming. And then there would be years where there'd be nothing. And I finally just said, okay, this book is going to come when it comes. I don't know why it's going this way, because I'm also a pretty fast writer typically. So it's very interesting. We have a very different journey to get here, but we both released, or Mona will release her book, I'm sure in the very near future, at a time when issues around the boarding school and issues around MMIW, especially here in the state of Minnesota, are really coming to the forefront. So I'll read a little bit from the book, and then it'll be Mona's turn to read. So it's called Carnival Lights, of course, and the main storyline is set in August of 1969, and the girls, Cher and Chris, Ojibwe cousins, leave the fictitious Goodhue Reservation, fictitiously situated in northern Minnesota, just west of Duluth, and they leave their reservation in August of 1969 for Minneapolis. There's a lot of backstory in the book about their ancestors, and then there's actually some historical fiction also woven in through the girls' story. So this is the prologue, Village of Park Point, August 3rd, 1860. The carnival came to town, but not until after the Indian bones were excavated. Under the red beam of the Minnesota Point Lighthouse, cast by a fourth-order Fresnel lens and illuminated by a kerosene lamp, a motley assortment of Finnish, German, and French men wielding spades and pickaxes broke joints, cracked femurs, shattered fingers, and split the skulls of those buried long before Europeans set foot on the shores of the westernmost tip of Gitchigami, renamed Lake Superior by the French. A former John Jacob Astor agent, in concert with the acting mayor of the unincorporated town of Duluth, made the decision to build a carnival to brighten the dour mood of the 60-odd dwelling on the shore and the few hundred in the logging and mining camps nearby. Although it was a hefty investment with questionable immediate return, the two men had plans for the port and needed to attract hundreds and eventually thousands more European immigrants to build the city. The two men believed once others heard of the grand carnival held there, Europeans would come in droves. The Europeans were sitting on a gold mine of trade prospects now that they had moved the Indians off the shoreline closer to Fond du Lac. The Indian graveyards had been a problem, though. The men worried someone might kick up a bone during the carnival and cause a sensation, frightening business to St. Paul or Chicago. So the bones were hacked out of the soil by European criminal castaways and thrown into a wagon drawn by a single draft horse lent by a man who used the horse to clear tree stumps from the burgeoning township. That is how the Indian bones traveled to their new home, nearly 3 miles down the river that flowed southward out of Gitchigami, the largest lake in the world. So obviously we're gonna skip around in the book. And this is Goodhue Reservation, so the reservation that the girls left, but it is in 1955. The girl's Aunt Em stayed awake at night when she was young to listen to the adult stories. Even as her siblings faded into their dreams at their grandparents' wigwam, Em's only movement was the flutter of her eyelashes, stark as spider legs against the shining whites of her eyes. Em knew how to be still. Her mother and grandmother had pinched her lips as a baby to teach her quiet, like their mothers and grandmothers had pinched their babies' lips to keep them silent in the forests and marshes, so their cries would not alert enemies lurking nearby. Em knew how to breathe so shallow that one would have to look for a long, hard time before realizing her belly and chest moved with life. She'd practiced as a girl, hiding from the white social workers. Her fluttering eyelashes were the only thing that could make her grandmother say, "The little one watches." Then the stories were told softer, all in Indian, no mixing of English and Indian words, which the girl could figure out, her mind bending in 2 languages. Or the stories simply ended altogether, the talk moving on to jokes and laughing and teasing and gossiping, such that Em lost the thread of that which she was not to hear. Indians dying from TB and influenza and the pox disease. Entire families gone, no one able to bury them, the animals and insects consuming their bodies. Or one left, a child, found alone without food or water for days, snatched up by the English and given or sold to foster homes, farmers, boarding schools, men on ships, or the state, where they'd be fed just enough to be kept alive. Many were sexually violated, girls and boys. When Em did manage to hear the stories, the ones not intended for her young spirit, the ones her grandparents wanted to protect her from, the most alarming of all were how Indians were captured and sold the way white men sell cattle and pigs, and how Indians were taken to Duluth and then across the water, Gitchigami, never to return. Indian bloodlines were spread all across the world now. So now we're jumping to Minneapolis, again in August 1969 with the girls, and they are now traveling with a young gay Jewish boy through the streets of Minneapolis. And they end up at a anti-war rally. Screams, whistles, and rocks flew overhead. The sound of the rocks ticking off brick buildings popped Cher's memory of her grandmother, telling her that the spirits always took 4, while her knife snapped carrots into medallion-shaped pieces for soup. Like the time the Roseau infant died in a truck accident on Highway 79, his blanket-wrapped body sailed between 2 tall cedar trees the farmer had left to break the wind. People said it looked like a football the high school boys kicked through the uprights on crisp fall evenings in town. The baby landed with a thud in the soft, furrowed ground. His neck snapped. 2 days later, 3 teenage boys drowned as they swam just 10 feet offshore at Little Elbow River, all strong swimmers. No one could explain it. The families of those who died were Methodist and Episcopalian Indians. The funeral homes in Cher's grandparents' house were packed full of Ojibwe from all over Minnesota, Wisconsin, North Dakota, and Canada for weeks. Cher pushed through the lilac bush. She smacked into a chain fence tangled with the bushes, saw a section where the fence flipped up like Batgirl's hair and slid under it. The other 2 followed, scrambling under the fence. The teens crouched in a yard on the other side, catching their breath as people screamed, whistles screeched, and rocks and bricks flew in every direction. "All hell's breaking loose," a man behind them yelled. "The cops are macing everyone." The girl's eyes locked. Chris did not see in Cher what she usually saw, that it would be all right. Fear moved in. Something bent between the girls, snapped, borne down by too much weight. Their losses, the chaos exploding around them, their pain, their ancestors' pain. Something moved in. Chris felt it and shivered in the heat. Cher did not see the crow-like bat beast flapping about Chris or feel the air thrust out from beneath its wings, but Cher smelled it. Without thinking, she spit. Her grandfather had told you, if death gets near you, spit it out, don't let it settle in you. And Cher did on her runs around the farm, through the woods and in town. If she happened by dead animals, a squirrel smashed flat on the road, a ripped apart carcass in the woods, she spit. If she got a whiff of a rotting, rancid smell, she spit. And so, crouched in the yard, she spit without a thought. 1 block away, hiding behind a garbage can used as a shield, a young Indian woman lobbed at the police concrete chunks she'd gathered from a construction site, her large brown eyes visible above the rag tied over her nose and mouth. If she had known about the girls, just 1 block west of her, or if the girls had known of her, the looming disaster may have been prevented. Instead, each fought as she could, not knowing 45 strides separated the girls and M from being reunited after she left her nieces standing by the barn. So now the girls are at the Minnesota State Fair, and again, it's August 1969. The girls moved through the city within a city. People shouted, music blared, rides clanged, grease sizzled, and vendors shouted their wares. The world's largest collection of live butterflies. Take some home for a penny, folks. 1 shiny copper penny starts your own collection of butterflies. And hot bratwurst with sauerkraut straight off the ship from Germany. And take a ride on the giant slide, folks. Safe for the kids and fun for the adults. Biggest slide in all the world, right here at the Minnesota State Fair. Best state fair in all the world. Yes, sirree, folks. Step right up, step right up. Take a ride on the giant slide. The girls passed between a 3-story high wooden statue of a pilgrim woman outside Minnesota Territorial Pioneers Hall and the shuttered booth of Wendell R. Anderson, your next governor. America the Beautiful blared through a speaker from Wendell's booth. The tinny sound of the song and its relentless repetition pushed the girls across the street to a lit up sign the size of a living room wall that read, "Welcome to the Minnesota State Fair, the largest fair in all the world. 322 acres of fun and fascination, nearly 1 million visitors each year." A black and white photograph of past and current board members was featured beneath the words. 12 smiling white men in short-sleeved dress shirts and ties surrounded an elderly white woman holding a blue ribbon and a pie. The photograph had been snapped in 1952, the year the board shipped in a V-2 Nazi rocket, displaying it at that year's fair on a plot of open land behind the oldest French fry stand at the fair, opened in 1932. Some on the board wondered about the wisdom of displaying a rocket that had killed thousands of Brits. Plus, news was leaking out about the 20,000 skeletal Jews who died building them in the subterranean tunnels of Mittelwerk in Nazi Germany. But they voted it in anyway. "The man," Chris said, looking at the photo on the sign. "Yeah," Cher said, "a bunch of them, and I want some of that pie." The girls laughed from their bellies, now concave. Included in the photograph was one D.T. Grusendorf, past president of the Minnesota State Fair Board, Duluth City Council member, and Duluth area forestry county agent. Grusendorf's personal crown jewel was his 1959 execution of his grand vision that he had of a 26-foot high, gold-colored fiberglass and weatherproof plastic component Neptune statue to celebrate Duluth's most recent designation as a foreign trade zone, which would bring in thousands of ocean-going ships. The Roman god of the sea held a trident in one hand and a replica of the Ramon de la Ringa in the other. The Ramon was the first modern ocean ship to pass through the canal in Duluth after the opening of the St. Lawrence Seaway, which allowed ocean-going vessels to sail all the way to Duluth. This created an even bigger shipping market for the inland port, state, and region, which included the increased export of Ojibwe women and children, although of course, selling Ojibwe people would never be publicly discussed in any tourist pamphlet or AAA guidebook. Grusendorf was behind the push to relocate Neptune to Canal Park in Duluth. Mayor E. Clifford Mork exclaimed, "It would be a tremendous tourist attraction for the city." Arriving in October of 1959, the statue stood for 4 years, just a few yards west from the 1860 carnival. Pockmarked by stones thrown by residents, One day, the torch used by city employees to remove the statue from its base for cleaning ignited the king of the sea. The magnificent vision by the mayor and a city council member of Neptune welcoming foreign ships to the shores of Duluth went up in flames, leaving just a pile of ash. The enormous statue burned in 5 minutes, since its insides were made of paper mache. The girls sat on a curb with a bucket of fries and a Coke. Faces merged into each other in the dark, lit up by the lights from the caramel apple carts, root beer stands, pretzel booths, foot-long hot dog booths, and the grandstand that read, State Fair Grandstand, live shows daily. Hey, Chris nudged Cher, pointing her lips towards a group of Indians in bell-bottom jeans. Sioux, I bet. Cher nodded, absorbed by the food, her stomach releasing a nod of hunger. What are we gonna do? Chris asked, her mouth full of French fries. Find a place to sleep. Cher shifted her boots on the pavement. Cher and Kristen licked the grease and salt off their fingers, drained the Coke, and tossed the cup in a barrel. The girls set off west down Minnesota Avenue, looking for a place to sleep. Miigwech.
Go right ahead, Mona, please.
I was lucky enough to have an advance read of Chris's powerful, powerful novel. And so I really recommend it. And like many people during this pandemic time, I had focus issues where it would take me a long time to read a book, and I just blew right through Chris's because it just, I couldn't stop reading it. So anyway, greetings everyone. It's such an honor to be here. I'm so grateful to Chris for inviting me to share this platform, and Sherry, who was also part of that invitation. And thanks to Peter and everyone at ESFL for all of the work you've done to make this possible. I really appreciate that. As Peter mentioned, I'm Yanktonai Dakota, enrolled on the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation, although I was born and raised in Chicago, and my mother, who's still alive, she's 97 years old, I just talked to her, and she was one of the founders of the American Indian Center in Chicago. And so I grew up knowing people of many different tribal nations, learning bits of their language and their stories and their spiritual practices. So it's hard for me to always stick to one tribal nation in my writing. But in the book that I finished just at the end of May, A Council of Dolls, which I'll be reading from today, this one does stick primarily to my own tribal nation, and it came as a surprise. I was writing a different novel I've been working on for years called Harvard Indian Seance at the Lizzie Borden Bed and Breakfast, which is it's a horror novel kind of, but the academic life of these 5 Native characters is also really important. But then I broke my arm up near the shoulder, and I wasn't able to type very well, certainly not with one hand. And so the doctor didn't give me permission to get back to typing until January of this year. And so I was just learning to use the arm again, started writing short stories. And then in February, this other novel just wanted to be born. So I wrote it really pretty quickly. And it is fiction, but it is very much inspired by some family experiences and stories. So there are 3 narrators, 3 girls from different eras. One is from the 1960s, which was my childhood era, one from the 1930s, which was my mother's childhood era, and one from the early 1900s, which was my grandmother's childhood era. And so I'm going to be reading from the section set in the 1930s, which is a fictional version of some of my mother's experiences. And her name is Lillian in the book, and her sister's name is Blanche. And Blanche is the sort of feisty one. Well, they're both feisty in their different ways, but Blanche is more openly feisty. And I'm old school, so I read from paper here, and I will try to make it not very noisy. So this is from a chapter titled Hole in the Heart, because the narrator was born with a hole in the heart. And because they were very poor, they didn't have playpens, but they needed to keep her really still as an infant. They sawed off a beer keg and kept her in that. And so she grows up just hating that stench and can never drink beer, which is my mother's experience. Blanche warns me that my nemesis is out for blood. Well, what she actually says is, you better be careful. Sister Frances is looking for any excuse to take you down. I already know. When I won the statewide spelling bee this week up against adults from all over North Dakota, you'd think from the nun's face that I'd just taken the Lord's name in vain while shooting up the room. She acts like I'm a gangster, the hidden Dakota stepdaughter of Babyface Nelson. Sister Frances should be happy that my winning word was canonical and not something embarrassing like scatological or gynecology. She'd probably faint if she even heard a term like that. According to her, we're not supposed to have bodies all riddled with sin, but turn ourselves into holy spirits that rise above life and blood and childbirth. The problem is, her Holy Spirit might be starved clean of every physical comfort or desire, but it's just plain mean as a rattlesnake. No, worse. As Blanche says, she is pure hell. The other teachers at school are proud of me, like I won because they do such a good job with backward Indian kids, turning us from hoodlum savages into respectable citizens. As a result of my win, I'm given special privileges to borrow a book from our small library, to take it with me instead of having to skim it right there in the few minutes of free time between chores and classes. Sister Frances catches me mooning over a new box of books donated to the school. I'm clutching a thick hardcover novel to my chest, A Girl of the Limberlost, which looks like heaven compared to the dreary titles on most of the shelves. Sister Frances points her long finger at me, something Ina taught us is severely rude. That is theft, she cries. Those books haven't been cataloged yet. How dare you touch them? She snatches the wonderful book from me and glances at the title page. It's gloriously illustrated with flowers and butterflies that look as if they could fly off the paper and swarm her face. The very existence of such a book is no doubt an abomination in her eyes. You are no better than a criminal, she says. The charge makes me gasp, though I could kick myself for not exerting more self-control. I understand Sister Frances. I know her language. This isn't personal, which makes it worse. The only reason she singles me out is because of my magic when it comes to words, the way they're never mysterious to me and always friends, how my ability to learn them, to weave them together, puts the lie to her beliefs and prejudices. If she could stamp me out, she would. I stain her world. Sister Frances has strong fingers that can grip the back of the neck like metal pliers. She grabs me, she nabs me like this and escorts me to the basement, where she tosses me into her favorite room, the dark punishment box that makes you feel like you're dead and buried and the rest of the world is gone. I know I've seen the last of the Limberlost, the last of the beautiful ink butterflies and any stories they carry on their bright wings. The nun will no doubt tear the book to pieces and feed it to the kitchen stove. She doesn't leave right away. I don't hear the clack of her boots on the stone floor. She must be listening at the door, waiting for me to cry and wail, or at least sniffle. She forgot to slap me this time before shoving me into the shadows. I'm sure her hand is burning over that lapse. The thought makes me smile. I never give her the satisfaction of tears. In the face of Sister Frances's anger, I turn myself into Blanche. Eventually, I hear the sharp noise of her steps walking away, each click like someone dropped a silver dollar. My head begins to spin a story of magical coins left in the wake of a villain's footsteps, so they end up making everyone rich despite their miserable actions. God gets the last word, I say aloud and laugh, because of course I don't mean Sister Frances's God, a being who creates a body only to ask it to stop being one, a deity who would choose the likes of her to be his bride. That's a God I don't want to believe in because he makes no sense. Hours pass and I'm out of stories. Turns out my stomach is more powerful than my brain, and in a shouting match, hunger is the loudest. I even take off my dress so I can lick inside the pocket where I smeared a dab of peanut butter from yesterday's sandwich. I lick along the seams and suck every last bit of fat and sugar from the fabric. I'm cold and hungry and lonesome. Ina says that school is good for me, but I don't think so. School makes me think mean thoughts, makes my sick heart open new holes. I'm afraid the last bit of love in the soft meat will bleed away, and I'll be just like Sister Frances. Now I'm skipping to the end of this chapter, and all that you need to know is while Lillian was in that punishment box, her doll comes back to her magically. Her doll is named May, although she's a Shirley Temple doll, and she was given to Lillian by mission ladies for Christmas because of her incredible ability with language. She taught herself to read as a kid, and they were always pushing her out front to give these readings, dramatic readings. She ended up giving this doll, even though it broke her heart, to a little friend of hers who was dying of tuberculosis. And May, the doll, the physical doll, was buried with this other little girl. But when Lillian really needs her, like needs this ally, suddenly May comes back to her and no one else can see her, but it's as if Lillian has just manifested her magically to be there as her protector. Okay. So Lillian is talking about Blanche. Something in her snaps while we're doing our kitchen chores. Blanche scrubs the floor while I peel potatoes. May is napping, curled around my ankle like a cat. She hums a peppy tune in her sleep that doesn't match the mood of the room. Maybe Blanche catches some wisp of music in the heavy air. Now she's humming too as she scrubs, though not the same song as May. She's on her hands and knees, wielding the brush with so much force, I think she might plunge it through the planks. She scrubs in rhythm to her song. Oh no, I recognize my sister's quiet tune, a song our Ina taught us which honors Sitting Bull, our Lala. Blanche's hum streams quietly from her nose through several rounds of the song. I know better than to say anything. When she's mad, she can be perverse and do the opposite of what she's told. I remind myself to breathe, to keep breathing for all of us. My knife slips on the potato and I'm lucky I don't cut myself. Be careful, I say to myself, to my sister under my breath. I don't know how much time passes. Whenever I'm most afraid, time slides right off the clock and becomes something else, a slow oozing paste that makes each moment work to unstick itself. How many minutes pass before Blanche adds words to her song? Dakota words that tell the story of Lala and his courageous heart. How many minutes before her song gets louder, the scrub brush pounding the floor in accompaniment? I finally unlock myself and force my legs to stand. Blanche, stop, I cry. May wakes and grabs my leg tight as if she too is scared. Blanche doesn't hear me. Her anger has torched all sense of fear. Or maybe it's devotion that fills her now, so there's no room for anything else. She's like a girl martyr who can feel the first lick of an executioner's flames because she's wild with spirit. Maybe Blanche isn't here in this kitchen, but walking with Lala beside the Grand River, flowing with it and matching its sweet song with their steps. Soon, Blanche is loud enough to bring nuns on the run, skirts flying, some clutching the long crucifix they wear so it won't bounce obscenely against their bodies. I find myself standing over my sister. I grab her scrub brush, but her grip is too tight. I let it go. I hear myself beg her to stop, to be quiet, as if it's someone else who pleads. I kick over Blanche's bucket to get her attention, but she doesn't seem to notice. Sister Anne is the first to reach Blanche. She's the gentlest of this order of nuns. She's crying like me, like she can't bear to see this girl throw her life away. When Blanche sings louder, Sister Anne tries to stuff a dish towel in her mouth, but Blanche is too quick. She's on her feet, dashing past. She can sing and race around the room at the same time. She leaps onto a chair, and from the chair onto the massive table. She kicks the potatoes I was peeling onto the floor. She breaks so many rules at once, beginning with the use of our language. I'm ready to faint. This feels a bit like the end of the world. Some part of me says, that's crazy. Why should a girl singing in a kitchen be the end of the world? Nuns pile on top of my sister and I can't see her anymore. Sometimes her song is muffled, but she must be hitting the sister's hands because the song always breaks through again, defiant as any warrior's battle cry. I'm shaking so hard I can hardly stand. And it's May who comes to my rescue. She can't seem to do anything to help Blanche, but she's determined to keep me safe. She raises her hand in the air and waves it at me. I reach down, and as soon as we clasp hands, the magic takes over. May and I become weightless beings who can float on air. We rise up, passing the table and the massive stove, higher than the windows, so high our heads gently bump the ceiling, and we rest against it like carnival balloons. We have a bird's eye view of the skirmish. My sister is covered with nuns, the way ants swarm a beetle trapped on its back, or crows peck apart a downed squirrel. I can't tell if she's still singing because there's a roar in my ears as if the Grand River has flooded its banks and is about to smash through the kitchen. My emotions are flat in this weightless space and can't upset me. All I can do is watch. Sister Frances is trying to thrust soap in Blanche's mouth, her homemade industrial soap that can burn for days. But Blanche is a thrashing buffalo spirit no one can subdue. The nun points, commands. Sister Bernard is heating water in a cauldron. Not too hot, Sister Frances must order, since it doesn't take long. She bends over the cauldron, working the soap with her hands in the heated water. What is she doing, I wonder? May works out the puzzle ahead of me. Soap, soup, she chirps like what's happening is a game. It turns out Sister Frances's imagination is every bit as large and diabolical as my own. She gets soap in Blanche's mouth by pouring it in, one ladle at a time. And even though I'm held by magic that soothes the edges of panic, I can't help hollering down to the cluster of nuns that they'd better stop or they'll drown my Blanche. Hours later, when May has brought us down from the ceiling and allowed the sisters to lead me to bed, she tells me what happened. How Sister Frances poisoned Blanche with lye from strong soap. How Sister Anne held the girl and wept, but couldn't save her after hours of vomiting blood. How the doctor arrived too late and wrote down whatever Sister Frances told him to write on the death certificate because it was the middle of the night and he wanted to return to sleep. How Sister Frances told the other nuns that what happened was a tragic accident, but no doubt a censure from the Lord brought down on Blanche for her wickedness. I'm too numb to believe the doll. The horror of her words divides at the top of my skull and drips down each side, falling away from me. I listen like I'm dreaming, and the dream is a nightmare, but nothing that can truly hurt me once I wake. Thank you.
I'm kind of at a loss. I think you have both created characters that in a very short amount of time we come to care about, that the characters are in situations that on some level we know about, and on another level have been protected from. Mona, I hope that not only does your book get published soon, but that when they decide to do an audiobook, that you be the reader.
Oh,
Because, wow. So, but I want to start by asking Chris and Mona, is there something that you want to say to each other? And maybe that's a place for us to begin.
First, thank you. Thank you so much for those really supportive, encouraging, kind, generous words. I really appreciate them. Thank you, Peter. And Chris, I really want to thank you for taking on this incredibly just horrific issue, and to be living with it for years, as you know, because we were talking about how you would think you were finished and then you'd go back into it again. And if you wanted to talk about this, only if I would be interested in knowing how you handled that material that I know touched really close to home for you in so many ways. But anyway.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I cannot wait to both listen to your book, listen to you read your book, and to read it. It's just really fantastic. So looking forward to that. Yeah, it really was a very interesting process of writing this book that I'm not sure I completely understand, which is okay. But you know, like I said, there would be times when I thought I was done. I was just about to send it off to my publisher, and all of a sudden, this whole character, and you know, thinking about one in particular, his whole backstory, everything about him just like went whoop, right, and I was just like typing as fast as I could to get it all down. And then I literally sobbed for a week. Like it was so real to me.
Mhm.
And I can't say that I understand that. I probably have to pass tobacco to an elder to get some information about that. But you know, that was the characters were very impactful on me. And I feel very connected to them, and it is not autobiographical. It's not an autobiographical book. But I think that, you know, for me anyway, there's just a tremendous amount of love for being Native, being Ojibwe, the elders who held on to our culture despite everything. Like, it's so true for so many, you know, different Native nations and tribes. And so, you know, a lot of times I feel like, you know, like you start writing the description and you're reading about it and so forth, but I want to be like, but this is about love. You know, this is about love. Like this looking at something, you know, with such honesty and looking for that truth. People tend to, you know, sometimes kind of pull away from that or not want to know it. But for me, that act is about love, and it's about honoring the characters, but it's about honoring the ancestors. It's about honoring those and the survival of our culture and how our culture continues to, you know, thrive. So yeah.
I'm so glad you brought up love, because at the end of my novel, these three dolls who have been there for their girls in these different generations and just horrific circumstances, I give them the last word, and they talk all about love, that this is all about love. And my novel is so much about healing generational trauma. And one of the characters in a different chapter than the one I read, I was going to say my grandmother's chapter. Again, it is fiction, but very much inspired on stories that I heard about her experience at Carlisle and her later husband's his experiences at Carlisle Indian Industrial School. And so in her chapter, there's this character I just call Injured Woman, and she is an ancestor who was a victim at the Battle of Whitestone Hill, which really should be called the Massacre of Whitestone Hill, where my ancestors barely survived this unprovoked attack by Generals Sully and Sibley. This was in 1863, and I mean, they were trying to basically commit genocide and kill all Dakota people. And so this character, Injured Woman, she appears to this young girl, and she's picking at her wounds. I mean, it's really horrible. It's like she has no tongue because it was cut out. She's been sliced with I always forget what those are called, like the points at the end of guns, and she's been shot, and she's keeping them fresh and keeping them open. And she explains it's not to be dramatic, or what it is if the flesh heals, it's just hiding something that hasn't really healed, this horror. And so she's trying to keep, even though it's so painful, she's keeping these wounds open. And then that pain gets passed on to the next generation and the next generation. So anyway, I'll stop babbling, sorry. But yeah, there was, as I was writing this, I just felt my ancestors all around me. And I just, even though some of the things I was writing about were horrific, I felt more the love and the healing that was happening in telling these stories. And yeah.
Yeah, one of the core values of Ojibwe culture is debwe, truth, and that's just something that I feel is so profound, and particularly in the culture, the dominant culture that is happening now and is unfolding around us. Something that people might think is that simple is that profound. We need the truth. We really
Yes.
need the truths. I mean, there's,
Yes.
there's many stories, of this land. I think we're talking about some very similar stories, and
Yes.
hoping, my hope is that this book heals. That's what I feel. That sounds grandiose to say, but I hope this book is a healing book for a lot of people.
Absolutely. I know that it just had a profound impact on me. And I just felt so very grateful that you did that work, that you put that out there in the world, and that other people can come to it.
How did you, I'm just curious how you came up with the dolls. Like, do you want to share that sort of process or how that happened?
Sure. So I was always crazy about dolls as a kid, and I had this baby doll that I just adored. But my father had a tussle in buying it because he bought me a black baby doll who, she looked more like my people, right? But this was in 1960 Chicago at a Sears store, and the sales lady didn't want to sell the doll. She kept trying to direct him over to the white dolls. And so this baby doll in the novel, I call her Ethel, and she's in the 1960s section. Back at the end of 2019, I wrote this short story about this little girl and her doll, Ethel, and how much this doll is alive for her and really helping her through some pretty traumatic things that are going on. And then more than a year later, a friend of mine who had just read that book said, there could be a whole novel about Ethel and Black protectiveness. And for some reason, her just saying that story in a novel put the idea into my head. And I thought, oh my goodness, I could have 3 generations. And so it moves back in time. So it begins with the 1960s narrator. Then my mother had mentioned being given this baby doll by a mission lady, and I made her into a Shirley Temple doll. And my grandmother had a traditional Dakota doll. So it just, I don't know, it just kind of, it just came together. And the dolls are a really important part of the story. But I work very intuitively. I don't always know why I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm just following this inner guidance and impulse. And so sometimes it can be hard to even talk about my process, because I'm like, I don't know. I'm always impressed with authors who, that it's all very cerebral and they've made these very conscious choices. That's not me. I'm like wandering through and just following what feels right,
Yeah, I'm the same way for sure.
And it feels like ancestors sometimes are tapping us, we want you to do this now. And so, yeah.
That's great.
So let me just jump in for a sec and ask my colleague Carla to put up a slide about independent bookstores. And so if you want, you can't yet buy Mona's book from which she's read this evening, but there are other books that Mona has written that you can buy, and Chris's book is indeed available. And so we want to encourage everyone to patronize independent bookstores to find these great stories. And while this slide is up, maybe you might think about a question or a comment that you would like to ask of either Chris or Mona or both of them. So why don't we move into more of a question and discussion format, and see, and it can just be send some love to them, whatever. But please use the chat or use the comment function on Facebook, and let us hear from each other. So Mike Johnson has said he's speechless. This is so powerful. Indeed. Oh, pardon me, Mike. Mike's pronouns are she, her. Thank you for correcting me. Well, I want to dare to ask, as a historian, I've come to think about history not as the study of the past, but as the study of change over time. And both of you have written novels that move. Mona's backwards, Chris's forwards and back again. And I wonder, and this is a terrible challenge for me to pose to you, and I think none of us are naive believers in progress. But how do you see change being embodied in the stories that you tell?
Chris, do you want to start? Or
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I can want to think about it for a second, but change. Yeah, I think that the way I think about that with Carnival Lights is that there's these two, main characters, and they're going through this journey, right? Coming of age journey, if we want to call it that, whatever. And many of their experiences are, a lot of people are gonna resonate with them. And I really, on sort of a psychological, emotional, spiritual level, I really kind of pulled that out for people who have maybe been through similar experiences, to be able to see that represented and maybe find some healing and not feeling alone and so forth. But also for people who maybe are trying to understand what that's like, for them to see it down on the page and have a better understanding of what it's like to survive those kinds of atrocities or onslaughts. And then the intergenerational, piece of that is that, the way that like our elders will often talk about that is that if you heal, or if the character heals something, in your present day life, that actually can go back and heal your ancestors as well. And so, that's that idea, right, Peter? That a lot of times we think, well, they're, some cultures would think, well, they're gone, they're doing whatever they're doing, but we're always all connected with our ancestors. And I have experienced that in my own healing. I have felt that with particularly my grandmothers, healing their own things, even though they're past, through my own healing. So like on that individual level, I hope for that intergenerational, and, this isn't a tragic story, of stoic Indian people who are just run over by history. This is a story of, power and love and intelligence and survival and all of those things, and keeping alive the culture, even when you have to hide it. But also thinking more broadly about, I don't know if we want to talk about Minnesota, or the US or whatever, to also kind of a call for everyone to look at, in this case, what happened in Minnesota. Like this is not an accident. Assimilation and attempted genocide, they're not accidents. They were, created, and then they were spread in a variety of ways, by individuals. And really, really wishing that this land and this state that I love, I love this area, wishing for healing in that way, in the need for people who have maybe benefited from that, or maybe, you know, their ancestors were part of that, or they just aren't aware, to have some kind of awareness, and then I guess some sort of sense of accountability and some sort of justice for what has been silenced. You know, speaking just about even Minnesota here, this has been silenced. It's been it was purposely designed, and then it was purposely hidden and silenced. And so I hope that in that way as well, that this book brings those things forward. For instance, that in the early 1950s, the Minnesota State Fair had a Nazi V2 rocket on display, you know? I mean, there's a lot that people do not know about the state. You know?
Thank you, Chris. Mona?
That was such a great
Yes.
response. Thank you. Thank you for that. Excuse me. One thing I've noticed in my own family, some of my cousins started sharing some of our family stories that, you know, you want to be careful to ever focus on the negative or the hard times or the difficulties. But it turns out many of us were really working to personally heal some of the dysfunction, some of the really unhealthy patterns that we know where they came from. They came from colonization. They came from these Indian boarding schools. They came from, you know, just the trauma that our ancestors went through. And we understand that, but it felt like we were carrying these generations of pain and generations of dysfunction. So I wrote this essay for the wonderful Carolyn Holbrook and David Mura. They have a book coming out in the fall, an anthology. I think the title is We Are Meant to Rise. And so I was invited to write an essay for that. And so I wrote one called, I think it's The Courage of Holding Together, the Courage of Falling Apart. And it's talking about healing generational trauma in my own family, and that I had these ancestors who just were trying desperately to survive and to keep their children alive. They were just hour by hour trying to survive. And there's no space for healing. There's no, you know, they don't have the luxury that I've had to have a lot more space and time, to have had access to all different kinds of healing and different kinds of help. And so finally, I was the generation that was going to start attending to all of that trauma. And so for me, when I think of change and progress, it started really on that very intimate personal level. But as Chris said, and it's even written in the book, in my novel, this most recent novel, where a character is talking about how, you know, time is this relative that flows in all kinds of directions. And so when one person heals, you're not just healing yourself and future generations, it's also moving backward to help heal the ancestors, so they can set down their pain and their grief and their vengeance sometimes. And it talks about the difference between the wrecked child and the power of the wrecked child and how much destruction they can wrought in the world, and the mended child. And it's the mended child that brings us to those healthier waters. And so the book, this novel ends coming back to the present time with the grown-up version of the little 1960s girl who is closest to being me, and her healing path. And so I'm coming at it really from a very personal, the personal level, partly because I'm an introvert. My mother was the one who was the activist, and I would go along with her as a child, but I was always this really painfully shy introvert. So, you know, I'm doing it in this very different way.
Well, lucky us. So we do have some questions that have come in and comments. And in light of actually what you've both just been saying, Renee has asked, how do you each hold the pain that you stand in with your characters? Do you limit the amount of, so this is a writerly question, do you limit the amount of time that you spend with the pain to bring relief to the past, the present, and the land is so important? And thank you so much for opening these stories. But these are hard, harsh painful stories. And so how do you hold the pain and in telling these stories and in listening to the characters who ask you to tell their stories?
For me, and that's a wonderful question, and thank you so much. I have to say that when I'm in writing mode, I'm in full-on creative mode. That's such a healthy space for me that it operates almost like a buffer. So I'm seeing what's happening, and sometimes I'll be crying and I don't realize I'm crying until, you know, I'm having to reach up and it's like, what is that? What's getting in the way of my vision? And so I'm able to somehow detach and just remain in that space. And it's usually after I finish the writing session that I sort of have a little breakdown or meltdown, at least with this book that I finished just recently. I would just be crying. I would just, even, although it wasn't just sadness, I was feeling a lot of elation. I felt like there was actual, I mean, this can sound very pompous, but it did feel to me like there was actual healing happening with my ancestors, between different family members who have passed on, and it just made me so happy, feel so humbled to have been tapped to do this project, this work, and so yeah, I'm somebody who's a very emotional person, so I've never been afraid to let it all out. So yeah, after a writing session, I would just let it all out. I would sob, I would hug myself, I would talk to my ancestors, and yeah, I'm glad no one was videotaping that. So.
I muted myself. I think there's a lot of similarities, you know, for what you just said, between, you know, the two of us and our experience and our process of it. Writing is a joyful, creative activity. And my first book, Nichols, A Tale of Dissociation, is from the point of view of it starts off with a 4-year-old, and it follows her every 5 years, and it's written in first person. And it is, you know, she's being abused, and it's very intense. And, you know, people will ask me about that, and I'll be like, you know, I had a really good time writing it. It felt very freeing and really fun. Doesn't mean I didn't, you know, get up and walk around, because I had to, you know, lose some of that. But what I have also been told is that there have been times when I've been writing, I also write nonfiction, sometimes even academic articles, and I have been writing away. I'm writing about something that happened, and I have tears streaming down my face, and I'm not crying. Like, I just have these tears going down my face. And you know, an elder said, you know, those are the tears of your ancestors that are coming through you. So, you know, that's a really connected and beautiful way to look at it. And I think that's how you know, I don't really understand exactly how this, but the book feels like it came to me. These characters feel like they came to me. And I, you know, if I'm totally honest, I feel like, I mean, I wrote the book. I'm not trying to not take responsibility for it, you know, but I feel like these stories came to me, and because it's gone on for such a long time, it started to really weigh on me that I have this responsibility that I have not met yet. And I started to wonder if I would finish the book, if I could finish the book. And once I did, it's just like, I feel free of this. Like, I feel like, that, yeah, I just feel free of that responsibility. And it feels like a serious responsibility to me, like a very serious responsibility. So, yeah, I don't know if that totally answers the question, but I mean, our teachings are to not sit in pain and hold pain, you know, just hold it, put it down, you know, and especially because if it's not your pain, you know, you want to be aware of it and you might feel it, but you want to put it down. You don't want to carry the pain of other people. You want to let that go.
So lovely comment from Kilo Marie. I thought I would walk away heavy from this. Instead, I haven't felt so much hope and healing in a long time. Thank you. And then let's see.
I think that's if I could just jump in.
Please go right ahead,
I
Mom.
think in this country, in the mainstream, often people are so afraid to confront these really difficult histories. You know, we have these battles now about what history is allowed to be taught, and oh no, we
Right.
can't freak out our children with the truth. When actually I found in my life, the more I just face things head on. I mean, when I'm ready, you know, sometimes we're emotionally in a fragile place, so I'm not telling people who are in that space to do this, but at some point when you just charge into the truth of what happened to others, what's happened to you, and you don't code it, you don't try to find something positive in it, you just look at it, you just take it on. It's one of the most healing things to do. You know, that's what can heal a community. That's what, I mean, can heal yourself, you can heal a family, you can heal a community, you can heal a state, you can heal a nation. And I'm just tired of the gaslighting where different people want to tell their truths, different populations want to tell their truths, and others are like, oh, it wasn't that bad. Oh, you're exaggerating. That's what keeps the wounds open and unhealed for everyone.
Yeah.
And the truth, you know, individually, intergenerationally, and as a, you know, country with many, many different cultures here who have gone through many different things, you know, some as, you know, perpetrators, some as ignorant, you know, some as people who have been harmed or groups who have been harmed. The truth is going to chase you around. It's not going to go away. The truth is there, you know, it exists. And it's not going anywhere. So you can placate it, you can squish it down, you can run from it. God knows I've done that, literally and figuratively. You know, you can do all of these things, but like what Mona was saying, if you sit with it, you know, pay attention to it, listen to it. What does it have to say? That's where that healing comes in, and that's, you're free. You know, when you can look at it and you can, you know, it might take you a little bit. You might have to take it in pieces, like Mona said, you know, but when you can take that and you can break it down and you can absorb it, and it becomes a part of your awareness and a part of your consciousness and the way you're living your life, honestly, with, you know, honesty, that's freeing. Otherwise, you're going to be drinking, drugging, sitting in front of the TV for hours. You know, this culture has, you know, many, many different things for people to engage in to escape.
Yeah.